Hey, welcome. I'm just gonna hop right into the first question.
Okay.
So you've described fawning as the trauma response that often gets praised. Can you break down what fawning actually is and also why it kind of flies under the radar in a lot of conversations around trauma responses?
I love that question. Thank you. Yeah, so we've long talked about fight, flight, or freeze, and they appear just as they sound, right? And so for a lot of us, particularly childhood trauma survivors, relational trauma survivors, the fight response probably made things worse, right? So that's actually not keeping you safe. The flight response, where are we going to run, right? Where are most of us going to go? It's not really an option, particularly if you're a child and living with your caregivers. Freeze is a common response for childhood trauma, but fawn is actually about leaning in to the relationship, right? And sort of managing the moods and the states and it can look really different depending on the person, depending on the context. So sometimes it's referred to as please and appease. It is that sort of people-pleasing tendency. I believe it's the root of codependency, but it's basically about like, how do I stay in this relationship and still reduce the harm? And because we are staying in the relationship, I think it's been missed as a trauma response. It looks like we are, in fact, choosing to stay. And what I love about the lens and language of fawning as a trauma response is that it puts these behaviors back in the body, back in the context of a threat response, right? We're not these sort of goody two shoes, like people with no self-worth who don't care about ourselves and just need to raise our self-esteem. I think, in fact, the genius of all the trauma responses, but the genius of fawning as an adaptation to survive the environment that you're in as unscathed as possible means we actually love ourselves a whole heck of a lot. So I think it's been missed. I was going to say something else. Hold on one second. So I think it's been missed for this reason that we stay in relationship, but I think it's also just been talked about in a way that wasn't trauma informed, right? We've just used this other language for so long that didn't ever really resonate with me as a survivor, particularly because these words are so stigmatized and pathologized. And there's just this idea that, like, first of all, I'm already riddled with shame. You don't have to shame me even more for the way that I responded to these things that happened in my life. So fawning to me just sort of makes sense of all of that, which actually allows me to make sense to me, the greatest gift of all, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say too about kind of the language that's been historically used around fawning is very shame-based.
Yeah.
I was recently reading a book on codependency. I can't remember the name, but it was one of the first books published on codependency. Do you know what I'm talking about? It was in the context.
Codependent no more, Melody
Yes.
B.
And I actually stopped very quickly after starting it because it was so um clinical and kind of coming from this angle of like there's something wrong with you
Yes.
if you're doing this instead of really looking at it through the biology, which is what you do. And
Yes.
I feel like the way it lands is so different when you um look at it from that angle. And so what do you think we miss when we just call it people pleasing or we look at it from a more um clinical standpoint instead of taking the biology into account?
Well, I think you miss a couple things. You don't just miss the biology, right? Like what's happening in the nervous system. You also miss the context. We're placing the origins of these behaviors strictly in the individual. And to your point, saying like, you have a disease, right? Or you have an addiction to control and you just can't let things go. And so we're missing the context of why would somebody do that, you know? So again, relational trauma puts it back in the relationship. And this could be a relationship of a family of origin. It could be that you're a person of color and you live in a world that's not designed for you, right? And sort of you're having to kind of shape shift. It could be, there's a host of reasons and contexts where basically fawning happens when we're disempowered, right? The body knows that we are living in these various hierarchies, and the body knows where it exists in the pecking order, right? So I think the context goes missing. That was a big thing for me. I actually went back and looked at Codependent No More myself as I was writing this next book on the fawn response. And there were a host of definitions. Like, in essence, I think she was doing then what I'm trying to do with fawning now, which is to say, let's look at the lived experience of this thing and sort of help people to understand. So I love the intention there, but she gave a host of definitions. But the one that, and some of them I resonated with, quite frankly, but the one she landed on is the one that sort of really resonated for her, was the one that for me was like this slow motion arrow to my heart. It was like, I cannot identify with that. It was deeply shameful and also painful, right? So I think that's what's been missing. But the larger context and what's happening in our nervous system below our conscious awareness. So if I didn't say that already, you know, what we know about trauma responses, they're not a conscious choice. And it's easy to see when you look at the animal kingdom and the animal defenses, that a prey animal out in the wild who hears a sound and bolts doesn't stop to think about it and go, am I being ridiculous right now? Right?
This is a trauma response.
Yes, exactly. The body acts, it reacts, it does it quickly without our consent. It doesn't care about our opinion. So I can tell myself all day long, I want to take care of myself. I want to set better boundaries. If my body doesn't feel safe to do so, I can't just avail myself of those choices as though it does.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so, kind of bringing in the idea of, I love the idea that we're in mammalian bodies and
Yeah.
we are, kind of at the will of these mechanisms that operate within these mammalian nerve systems.
Yes.
And so, how do you see fawning in the wild, like in the animal kingdom?
Well, that is not my expertise, but I will say the person who coined the term, who is Pete Walker, who is a psychotherapist working with complex trauma for probably decades now, he coined the term fawning, really, I think, for the alliteration of fight, flight, freeze, fawn. But he shared this story. He and I had a conversation, I think years ago now, where he said, I think he was watching like a Natural Geographic documentary, and it was a pack of wolves, and there was like the outlier wolf, and he thought, oh no, right? They're either going to get into it or that other wolf is going to bolt. And that is not what happened, is that he saw this wolf kind of be like, hey guys, like, you know, no harm here. How's it going? He saw the wolf like start to kind of lean in and figure out how he could fit in, right? Go along to get along. And he thought, oh my gosh, I see that with my clients all the time. And then he turned around to get a glass of water and his toe rammed into the couch, you know, when you do that and it hurts like hell.
Yeah.
And he goes, and I apologized to the couch. So it was just this moment where, like, he saw this in the animal kingdom. He saw himself sort of not essentially having a self, reflexively prioritizing even an inanimate object because this thing gets so habitual and wired in that that's how he coined the term. But you talk to different people, they would say fawning is strictly a human adaptation. I'm going to stay out of the debate on that one, right? I'm not really sure, but I certainly think Pete's take on it was interesting.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that was the core of, or how it came to be.
Ah, how we started to crystallize, you know,
Yeah.
conceptualizing the fawn response. Yeah.
And what's something that you wish that more therapists understood about fawning? And I'm just gonna let my dog out really fast because she's giving me a stink eye. So just
Okay.
one moment.
Okay.
Some, just a joy of working from home. I'm gonna repeat the question just
Okay.
so it's a little. Cleaner. Okay. So, what's something that you wish that more therapists understood about fawning?
I think fawners are great at appearing like we understand, like we agree. We don't even want to risk the relationship between our therapist, right? There is this need to be like, if I'm the outlier wolf, I need those other wolves to like me, to give me permission, to validate me. And so if this is the thing that's sort of going along all the time under the radar, of course, we're going to bring that to therapy. And if you go back to this idea of a hierarchy, right? Therapists are sort of the experts, right? We're there to ask help. And I think a lot of therapists take this stance, and depending on their orientation, they can sort of be less relational in the room. And that's intimidating. It's really intimidating for a fawner, for a relational trauma survivor in general. And so they might mistake their client's appeasement for doing great in therapy, because the fawner could say like, yes, I tried that intervention and I found it helpful, right? Notice that my voice, of course, goes way into my head and I'm not in my body at all, even as I say it. But so as clinicians, we have to make so much room for the messiness, for the terror of conflict, disagreement, and opinion. These are things that will not come into the room otherwise.
And I'm even curious about how it might be for someone who's in the therapist role who's really practiced in fawning, like how that might be for them in their own practice.
Well, I can say for myself, long before I knew about fawning or could even understand that my experience was that of a complex trauma survivor, I'm afraid of conflict, right? So I think as therapists, we also have to look at, this is true generally speaking, like, am I doing my own work, right? Because I can only be with people and take them as far as essentially my window of tolerance will allow. And so I think for a long time, I probably wasn't willing to ask certain questions or certain reflections, because I wanted my clients to like me back as much as they wanted me to like them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. That's really interesting too, the relational aspect, because it sounds like what you're saying is something that could be really supportive for the therapist who's really good at fawning and the client who's really good at fawning is maybe experiencing safe relational rupture, but maybe that not being possible because it's not within the window of tolerance of both parties.
Right.
And
But
so, yeah, go ahead.
no, just say more. I want to understand more about what you're saying. You're saying it could be healing for both people, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, just in that space, but it sounds like what you're saying is the therapist might also not have the capacity or
Yes.
their window of tolerance to
Yes.
even facilitate a safe relational rupture, so it's maybe avoided. Um,
Yep.
but even on that topic of safe relational rupture, how does someone who is, because I know because I'm really good at fawning too, when you're really good at fawning,
Mhm.
you avoid relational rupture and then don't have a lot of experience with it, and then like safe relational rupture, what even is that? And so
Yes.
how does one start to a build a window of tolerance to experience that and hold those experiences, and then also be, what does that even look like, safe relational rupture?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can just speak from personal experience primarily, is that I've always been a relational therapist who brings more of my full self into the room. And so for me, that means self-disclosure, right? About like, I don't know, a whole host of things. An example isn't coming to mind, but it's kind of like I have to go first. I have
Mm,
to go first, even in storytelling. And I think, that's sort of what has been similar in terms of going on social media as a therapist. I really try to lead with myself as a trauma survivor more than a clinical psychologist, because I'm saying, here's my lived experience of these things. And then I think that can help people drop their own defenses around it. They're like, well, if she's a shrink and she's experiencing this kind of stuff still, like maybe it's okay that I don't have it all figured out, because The other thing is we are never going to get rid of our trauma responses. We're never going to override our body. Let's be honest, that was my mission for the first several decades of my life. I was going to figure out how to like wrap all that shit from, my history up in a bow and be free like some new version of me. What I continue to find is that it's not about like cutting off from my past. It's folding it in, and in the present moment, folding in the messiness of what it means to be in a body, in the world, in relationship. And so I think the going first piece of like, this feels messy, or I said that shitty, or I was thinking about something I said last week and I'm realizing, ugh, it didn't sit right with me. I'm wondering how that felt for you, sort of inviting in where I might notice that there was a potential rupture and letting them know it's okay to talk about that. So I think those are some big ways that we can set the stage.
In the therapeutic
Yeah,
context.
yeah,
I do really love your stories on your Instagram. And I feel like you bring in an element of humor that makes it a little more like these really terrifying or horrific experiences that could even like recounting it, I feel myself like
yeah,
going on almost into a freeze.
yeah.
And but you bring in this element of humor that brings in this softness, and I really appreciate that in your content.
Thank you. Yeah, it makes it creative for me, but also I think that if we can bring in humor, it reduces the shame. And it's not for everyone. Some people might be like, you're making fun of this, horrific thing. And that's certainly not my intention. My intention is to create more safety around, can we linger around this topic? And if we can do it with a little humor and a little bit of self-deprecation primarily, it's sort of like, okay, I know what you're talking about. And suddenly, if I know what you're talking about, I'm engaging with the very thing that maybe I've avoided my whole life,
Hmm.
right? What a powerful step.
Yeah, in a way that's a little more playful and less
Yes.
clinical.
Yes, 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 yes.
Yeah. And one thing you said too, about wanting to kind of be, you didn't use this language, but like be healed from
Oh,
your
yeah.
trauma responses. Like that's something I really, yes, I like really resonate with of like, okay, I'm gonna be better. I'm gonna be Kallie 2.0. I'm not gonna have
Yes.
any of these desires. Like one thing I noticed with in the language that I use is recovering people pleasers because it
Mm,
feels like a recovery process where I don't think I'll ever not have the impulse of
yeah,
fawning. Like I
yeah,
experience the impulse all the time.
yeah.
So I'm just curious how that is for you of like how I mean, I'm sure you're very different now than you were, like you said, like a few decades ago, but I'm curious how has that journey looked for you? And do you still feel the impulse? Like what does your fawning experience look like today?
Yeah. It definitely looks different than before. It feels different than before because now I'm aware of it. So I had no awareness of it before. I just thought this is what it means to be a person in the world, right? You're just
Stressful.
constantly oriented to other people over yourself, and you kind of exist, but only when they sort of allow you to, right? It's like that was just the way that it was. I went missing in my own life and I didn't even know it. So um my take is sort of, yes, it's not about getting to a finish line. It's really getting rid of this binary idea of healed or unhealed altogether, and being in, again, the messiness of sort of being in a body. And alongside that is, can we create a little more consciousness, a little more awareness? Sometimes it's only in hindsight. Sometimes, it looks like walking away from a conversation and being like, you know what? I didn't really give my honest truth. I completely fawned there. And if it's a safe relationship and it matters, we can circle back and go, can we do that again? I realize that like dot, dot, dot. And, but, but also, I shared this on Instagram recently that I was in this situation with my son around other families. And there was a person who was very aggressive, yelling at parents and sort of micromanaging kids in a really aggressive way. I wasn't necessarily, I was very aware that I was tracking him, that all my focus sort of went to him. but I did not feel in the moment that I could have done it any differently. I absolutely turned my attention to the one who was like perhaps going to turn their anger towards me or maybe to my son. And I got very agreeable and curious and deferential, and I lifted them up. And it was like, where are they sitting? My proximity was always in proximity to them. And it wasn't until after the fact that they sort of left this environment. And I heard from other families how they dealt with this same situation. And they dealt with it very differently. They dealt with it like, do not talk to my child that way, right? They dealt with it in distancing themselves. And I realized that was not anywhere on my radar, right? So I could be thoughtful about what happened again after the fact and go, okay, how do I feel about that fawning situation? As I just wrote a book on the fawn response, and I go, you know what? I'm not mad about it. I'm not mad about it. That makes me emotional. That was how I survived my childhood. I know that better than any other thing in my body, right? I did it exactly how I did it for so long. And did it work in that moment? Yes, it did. Yes, it did, right? I kept myself relationally safe. I kept my son relationally safe. And here's the thing. What we know goes hand in hand as we reflexively attune to others is I reflexively check out from myself. There's this thread in all of the symptoms of fawning, which is self-abandonment. Again, no one would choose that, but it's just what makes that mechanism possible, right? And so when I reflected on that, I thought, you know what? I'm not mad that that's what my body did. And I wonder what it would be like if I could have set some kind of a firmer boundary or had more conscious choice about it. Where would I have brought my attention to then? Might it have been these other families that perhaps are capable of reciprocal relationships and fostering the kinds of experiences that I'm longing to have? I think so, right? So then I could feel a little bit of sadness and grief about that, like the loss of opportunity of the kind of quality relationships that I'm longing to have. And so, you know, in this example, I think it just shows that like this is an ongoing experience. Do I want to live in that space 24/7? 100% no. And I don't. I don't. This was a discrete experience and a time and place that I can name after the fact. But I guarantee you, I was basically living in that all the time. What do you need? How do I make this situation work? Do I need to be a caretaker? Oh, I think they're feeling left out. I need to kind of rope them in. It was just this hyper vigilance all the time. And I don't feel that way anymore.
I love that you share that story. Because one thing I notice is that when people realize that they are fawning and they start to, learn more about it, and maybe they're fawning less actively, when times of stress happen, what I notice, and I know this in myself too, is, and like this is my whole like brand, is like recovering from people pleasing, and like, I go straight into it.
Yeah.
And it's like, because it's so reflexive, it's such a well developed muscle. And what I've noticed in myself and other people as well is that there's sometimes this coupling of shame, because it's,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I've been working on this, I've put work into this, maybe I've like put money into this. Like, what
Yeah.
am I doing? But really, it's this kind of like you mentioned at the very beginning, it's like this super loving mechanism of the body that's like, I'm going to keep you safe. Like, I know that this has worked for me in the
Yeah.
past. And
Yes.
it's historically worked almost every time. And so I'm going to bring this forward. And I'm really grateful you shared that story, because you
Mhm.
can write the book on this mechanism that the body uses, and it's still this thing that's so alive in the body.
That's right. That's right. And do I feel that sense of shame as I go to share about it? Yes, I do. But this is also what helps me reduce the shame as I go, Ingrid, you know, you know that that's not real. That part of what helps me to continue unfawning is to share the whole truth of what it looks like, because I'm making space not just for other people, but for my own process. I go, yes, yes, there's room. There's room, right? And so if the fawner habitually shrinks, of course it makes sense that we want to grow, but only in ways where we shine and look good and the highlight reel, right? But that's not what growth is. Growth means like there's the highlight reel, there's good stuff, there's joy, there's reclaiming things that like to me are beyond my wildest dreams. It's like what? But at the same time, I'm reclaiming access to my grief and my shame and feeling these things that, quite frankly, even the fawn response goes, nope, like we're not going to feel any of that. There's like a real, the self-abandonment of fawning comes out of a dissociative aspect of the response. So fawning is a hybrid where one part is hyperarousal, fight, flight. We're very active. Like I said, we're hypervigilant. We're managing moods and states. We're caretaking. But the other half that happens simultaneously is the hypoarousal, the disconnect from self, the depression, the dissociation. So again, depending on the person and the context, I think the balance of those things can look different in terms of how active we are and how sort of just like disconnected from self, but it's always a piece of the puzzle. And that means that the blinders can be really, really high to everything, to even to like, that same story I could say for someone else, or maybe for me years ago, I would not have even recognized that there was abuse going on. So
Mhm.
the fact that I could even say that in the moment I had that awareness, and then 30 seconds after the fact, I was like, oh, wow, other people did it differently. I wonder if that was available to me. It's like, yeah, I could sit in the shame about it or go look at the miracle of what has transpired and how far my body has come to be able to calibrate more and more in the moment, not just based on my historical relationship to,
Mhm.
you know, whatever it is, abuse, neglect, relational harm.
Mhm. Kind of moving into a different space too, still on fawning,
Yeah.
but specifically on the overcoupling around fawning and love. So,
Mm,
like, maybe speaking less of fawning as to the mechanism of fawning and more about just the attachment part of it. So, especially in childhood trauma. So, when being good is maybe the only safe attachment currency.
yeah. I don't know what the question is there. I'm just sort of like, yes, yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Happens.
Can we speak to that? Just when it comes to fawning and attachment needs and the idea of, or the felt sense of needing to be good in order to get those attachment needs
Yeah.
met.
So we are hardwired for connection. And we absolutely need, as human beings, our caregivers, I think, longer than any other species, right? So we are growing and developing for years and years and years with our caregivers. If they are deficient, if they are abusive, if they are neglectful, the body does not go, oh, this isn't a healthy dynamic, right? Like, I know how to hold on to myself. No, our self is literally growing in these conditions. And so again, you can't fight, you can't flee. And so the body goes, oh, I have to survive this environment and I need this person to care for me. It's life or death. Like the stakes aren't any
Mhm,
higher than developing your body in the care of another human being. And so we just close the gap, whatever the gap is. Oh, I guess let me put it this way. I talk about this in the book that a fawner closes the gap in the relationship, and that looks differently depending on the relationship. So perhaps what we've been talking about more is like an active threat coming at us. Okay, that
mhm,
was my stepdad in my case. So when the active threat is coming at us, we might ha 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 ha, we might smile, we might make you laugh. We're going to diffuse it some way. But when there's neglect, if someone is
mhm,
absent, the body's going to lean towards and be like, how can I fix it, solve it, make it better? Right? So that looks different than when someone's closing in. In this case, we're actually the one who's going to close in and try to like bridge that distance and be like, well, who do you need me to be? And how can I help you? Right? We're sort of wanting to bring that other person back online so that they can take care of us, because ultimately we know that that's what we need. And so, yes, our attachments are formed when our trauma response is in the driver's seat. And this is the thing that leads to so much reenactment, things like trauma bonding, because the fawning body found a semblance of safety and connection in the face of neglect and abuse and
Mm.
exploitation, right? So we talk about this as though it's familiar, right? Why do we repeat these patterns? Well, because red flags don't look like red flags when they feel like home. I think that's such a good way to talk about that. But additionally, when I'm talking about the fawn response, it's not just the familiarity. I literally experienced the only sense of relational safety I've ever had while I'm caretaking and appeasing and bridging the gap of this lacking attachment. So it becomes the blueprint,
Mhm.
and we do it over and over and over again, not knowing that that's what we're doing.
It's so interesting what you said too about the two different kinds of the diffusive kind of fawning, where the other person is closing the space between you and them, and
Yes.
then the kind of fawning that is more like you're the one going towards them, trying to maybe reanimate or aliven the relationship. And I
Yeah.
can even feel the felt sense of both of those in my body as you were saying that, because they are very different. One's kind of like this, where
Yeah.
you're like, hey, everything's good, everything's good. And one of them is more of a leaning in, like you said.
Yeah, like this
Yeah.
desperate need. And to go back to one of your earlier questions, I also think that's one of the reasons fawning has gone missing from the discourse, is that it really presents so differently depending on the person and the context. That's a whole host of different experiences that we just talked about in that, one aspect of the conversation. So it can be hard to pinpoint, right? Because someone might be like, well, no, I don't know that experience of like making somebody laugh when they're making me feel bad, but they might know the experience of no one was there for me and I became hyper independent and I'm going to take care of everyone around me because I don't know what it looks like to be taking care of myself.
Mm, dang it.
What's that?
I said, damn, that's all I have to
Oh,
say on that one. Yeah, I've not heard that broken down before, so that was really interesting to hear. Um, so you also talk a lot about narcissistic abuse. So how does fawning serve a function in those dynamics, and what happens when we stop performing that function?
woo. So I think this is a common pairing that we've known for a long time. We've talked about it historically as sort of the narcissist and the codependent, or the narcissist and the empath. And so, from my view, narcissism and fawning can absolutely go hand in hand. And I say this not to say that we attract narcissists, but if someone is essentially, they don't have a sense of self like the narcissist, and they're trying to get it by devouring yours, and the fawner is quick to self-abandon in order to meet somebody else's needs, right? You can see how these things, they coexist really well. One kind of feeds into the other. And my focus on narcissism initially just came from finally unpacking my own story and realizing, oh, that's what was going on in my childhood with my stepfather. What I now know is a very classic narcissistic family system. I did not know that for most of my life. No therapist ever pointed that out. No one gave me that language. And so when I had it, I was like, why aren't we talking about this? And of course, I came in contact with Dr. Ramani's work, and
Mm.
she's the expert. And so when people are interested, I always send them in her direction and to her content. But I definitely started to understand that was a big aspect of the roots of my fawning. And if you put it back in this context again of, is it sort of leaning in or is it leaning out? My mom, in relationship to the narcissist, was also a fawner, to the point that to this day, I think she still has the blinders on. Like, it wasn't that bad, right? Like, he was the love of my life. Like, you just believe that that trauma bond is love. And so as he was closing in on me, I was simultaneously turning to her, being like, wake up. You know what I mean? Like, I need your help. And she was incapable um, of doing so. So it's a common pairing. And again, if you look at that hierarchical thing, right, of someone who has more power, more status, more fire, any of those things are good, potentially turn on the fawn response in another.
So obviously, we don't want to be in these dynamics or these situations. They're not desirable. But at the same time, the way that you're describing it makes it sound like fawning is a huge resource in those situations when you're obviously a lot of children don't choose to be in situations like this,
Yeah,
or even adults. Like
yeah.
sometimes, if you don't know what's happening, if you're um not aware of the that abuse is happening and you're in these situations, I feel like fawning can be a huge resource and a safety creator.
It's both, right? Because again, we find safety, even a modicum of safety, in really sometimes dangerous situations. And it can also be the thing that keeps us there and doesn't allow us to leave when it might be safe to do so.
Can you
So
say that?
it's a
Yeah.
it's a yes and.
Can you say that one more time, that last bit?
Yes. So does fawning keep us safe? Yes. Is it a resource in internal family systems language? Is it a protector? Yes. Yes, it is. I think that it's all of those things. And it can also keep us blind to ongoing abuse and rob us of the agency required to extract ourselves. So that's that tricky line between, do I want my fawn response to come on in a moment when I need it? If it's helpful, yes, I do. Do I want to live there 24/7 in survival mode? So the body's not meant to live in survival mode all the time, but I think a lot of chronic fawners do.
Hmm. Yeah, that was great. So basically, from what I understand, you're saying is like, yes, it's a resource.
Yeah.
Yes, it keeps us safe. And at the same time, you talked about this self abandonment, this like numbing, this dissociation that is present during the experience of fawning. So while that is present, we're maybe not connected to, actually, I hate this situation. Actually, this is really unhealthy for me and I should leave, because there's this dissociative element that's present. So yeah, that's I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what does recovery from fawning actually look like in real time? Like, is there a moment that you remember choosing not to fawn and having uh, any kind of response about that?
I think I've had so many responses, and all of my clients, I've seen it time and time again, and they refer to it the same way. They're like, Ingrid, it's like jumping off a cliff, right? Because here's what we're suggesting. We're saying, don't do the thing that makes you feel safe. Drop that protector, drop that resource. Okay, that in and of itself, it's like, I'm naked, every nerve ending is exposed, I'm going to die. And then we say, go do something like setting a boundary, having a voice, having some agency, walking away. Lean in
Mhm.
to the very things that likely made things worse. Nobody wants to hear this recipe. I'm going to tell you right now. And I am also not going to sugarcoat it, that this is actually what we're asking the body to do. I say this is hands down some of the bravest, hardest, and yet most powerful, rewarding work you can do. So am I saying that yes, you're going to have to face some terror, probably. Is it worth it? I don't have a case, at least in my practice or the people that I've connected with, that say, oh my God, 100%. No, I wish I never would have, right? Because
Mm.
reclaiming ourselves as a whole person, like we talked about, like getting to take up all the space. I talk about it like this, like I was Pinocchio and I didn't know it. And so in this unfawning sort of healing journey, I get to go, I'm a real life boy. Oh my God, like I can walk, right? It's sort of, I can see, I can choose where I want to go. It felt like those things weren't available to me. And so this is maybe a silly example, but maybe not. But you asked for one. And what came to mind was when I first started sharing my story, and in particular on social media, right? So unfawning means I'm going to tell the truth, even if it's going to hurt someone's feelings. Like, oh gosh, I don't want anyone to be mad at me. I don't want anyone to see it differently or have a different perspective or come at me. It's that conflict avoidant thing. Even strangers to be like, that wasn't abuse or that's not complex. I just imagined the worst, from every angle. And yet there was this part of me that was like, I have to do what's right for me, no matter the consequence. So not only was the consequence facing all that terror of like, what's going to come for me, but I genuinely believed if I go online and I start, being a therapist on Instagram, which I was like, what am I doing? But if I do that in this way, I'm going to tank my whole career, my financial security, my credibility. I can't go on and make people laugh and do silly things. And yet it's what I genuinely felt called to do. It was in some ways the most me that I had ever felt. And it was all of me in one place. I wasn't just the helpful expert. I wasn't just the person who had information that could be helpful for you, but I don't really exist. I was like, yes, and I like to perform and I have a sense of humor and I can be kind of irreverent and I'm a survivor. This is personal experience. And all of me was present in one place and time. And it felt like I have to do this or I might die. And yet the stakes felt so high, like literally going, well, who's going to want to come to see me as a therapist now? And so everything I posted was like waiting for the hammer to fall.
Mm.
And what I experienced over and over and over and over again was a growing community and positive feedback. And again, that's not the point of it. It's not like it was about, again, external validation because we're trying to move away from that. But in terms of like what I imagined would happen and the stakes being really high, it is important to note that in fact the opposite thing happened. And
Mm.
I never would have known that. And so my clients will say the same. Whatever crossroads they get to and they go, oh, I have to choose me, even though there's going to be a consequence. There might be a consequence. I've certainly had a lot of my own real consequences. But what I've gained uh, has just made it worth it. There's no question.
Mhm. Yeah, what's coming up for me as you say that is this really scary experience of self-revealing.
Mhm.
And there's like performing,
Yeah.
there's like
Yeah.
been this consistent performance. And then
Yes.
it's like, is it safe to self-reveal? And then, like you said, when you started to do that, you notice like, oh, I'm receiving support. There's people that are seeing themselves in my story.
And
So
then I don't feel like I have to perpetually hide aspects of myself in order to be seen and understood, right? I felt more seen and understood when I stopped hiding these aspects of myself. It's kind of a simple math problem when you put it that way, but the body goes, no, it's not.
it does feel high risk though, like you
Very.
said, especially when it's linked back to our business, which is like really our survival. It's like how we put food in our mouths and a
That's
roof over
right.
our head.
That's right.
And I could keep going down that thread, but I have so many other questions I want to cover. Um, so switching gears a bit to talking about this idea of anger and the role that anger plays in healing from fawning. What was like that? What was that like for you? So was it a bit of a gateway? Like what was anger like in your journey in with
I think such a good question. It's a really important question because I think in the big picture, what I'm inviting people into is a healthy relationship with anger and a healthy fight response. And I think for a lot of us, these got snuffed out, like it's not allowed. And I also think that's encouraged in a lot of ways, both in mental
Mhm.
health and culturally. And I bought all of it, right? I was like, yes, accept everything. Like a lot of toxic positivity and spiritual bypassing. I was kind of like, sign me up, right? Sounds great. You mean I can just not feel any of this stuff and just also feel a little holier than thou at the same time? Fantastic. Except it wasn't fantastic because none of that did anything with the anger that I was actually holding, and all of this unmetabolized, from a somatic experiencing perspective, it was like that stuff needed to come out. And I kept going, no, you don't. No, you get back in there, right? And it manifests in all kinds of ways that are harmful and painful. And I will also be very honest and say this is true for me. I always, not always, but I often wonder if my story were different or if I'd come across this information earlier, dot, 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 what would it have been like? But here's the truth. I didn't really start this journey until my stepdad died. When the person who created all of these circumstances that necessitated my deep loss of self and shape shifting, my body did not feel safe enough to really address it until he was no longer on this earth. And I say that to people also as a way to give them permission that, like, we say the body keeps the score, and that's so true, but the body also knows when it's safe enough to do things differently.
Mhm.
And I don't know what would have happened if he were still here and if I got this information another way. Maybe I could have sort of found more of myself. But that's not what happened. What happened is he passed away. And then I was led on this journey to go, I have got to go and address everything that was unaddressed previously. And it's not because I didn't go to therapy. I could tell my story backwards and forwards, and I did. It's that I didn't know that it was trauma. I didn't know that it was narcissistic abuse. I didn't know what that did to me from a nervous system perspective. So I had a head full of information that did me, I want to say no good. It probably did me some good, but it didn't do me the good that I was hoping that it would. So I basically had to go back and reprocess and integrate everything that happened and kind of disavow all of the messages that I'd been living by for years and years in terms of forgiveness or acceptance or rising above and just focus on me and let other people off the hook. I had to go, no, 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 I can't like sidestep accountability here.
Mhm.
That's the other thing that if we go back to the codependency piece, it's sort of like I loved those ideas of just say what you mean and don't say it mean and set a healthy boundary. But all of it sort of, to me, sidestepped this like real accountability piece for the other person. It doesn't mean we can make someone else be accountable. It means I have to feel in my body that they should. That's that sort of healthy anger piece. It's like, wait a second, I was wronged. I was harmed. I never really was able to process those things because even in the moment in my childhood, everyone kind of turned to me and said, like, Ingrid, you're being ridiculous. You're being selfish, you're being dramatic, you're making things up. And so I just never processed any of that. And so we have to return to a healthy sense of anger. And anger is also this creative, mobilizing, healthy force that we're cutting ourselves off from if we don't. So it's not even just related to the traumatic event or, these specific things we're talking about. It's just sort of like I'm walking around like I have no agency in the world, right? I don't really have a voice. I don't really take up space. Having a healthy fight response and a relationship to healthy anger allows me to do that, to feel my presence, to feel my feet on the ground. There's sort of this animation, that reanimation that can happen. And so it's a big part of the process. And just like the rest of it, it can be a little messy. We're going to overshoot. If you've never sort of said, "Hey, that hurt my feelings," you're going to do it badly. And we go, okay, we're going to make room for that too. And hopefully come back to what feels like more of a flexibility with all of these things, right? Like That's what we're going for in this, like, widening our window of tolerance and our capacity to be present to all of these feelings. It's not that we're Zen all the time. It's that we can move in and out of all of these experiences and do it in a way where we're not abandoning ourselves.
Mhm. Yeah. I have like so many places where my mind is going with this.
Yeah.
Um, I love just talking about the piece of how important anger is, and then also how when we start to reintegrate, it can be really messy
Mhm.
because I know for myself, when I started to bring in that peace, it was like a whole lifetime of anger that had been like walled up in this dam was like, and like you said, it wasn't like, hey, that kind of hurt my feelings. It was like, how dare you? And it was like this huge, because I didn't, first of all, didn't know logistically how to kindly express my anger.
Yeah,
And,
how would you?
huh?
Yeah, how would you know?
I didn't I was not practiced, and I also had the felt sense of so much anger overcoupled from past experiences. So I wasn't just responding, "Oh, my feelings got hurt in this." It was like all the times I had my feelings hurt in my whole life and never said anything. So,
Yeah.
like, how do you experience that, and how do you recommend someone, experiencing that themselves?
I mean, I think there's a couple of things. One is I really do like somatic work for this very reason. It's like if you've never felt anger and it doesn't even feel safe to bring it into your relationships, which is probably true for most of us, can you be curious how it feels to do a muscle tension and relaxation, just to invite fire into your body and hold it, and then exhale and watch what happens when you let it go? And can you take a tray of ice cubes and go out to the sidewalk and huck them so hard? And then with the senses, because the senses are the language of the nervous system, not only are you physically throwing it, but you're hearing it and watching it crack, and you're seeing this like experience of this thing moving through you more like a weather pattern. And you notice what it feels like before and you notice after. I think there are lots of sort of safe ways, grabbing a bunch of paper, like just asserting yourself essentially, right? Like, and maybe thinking about the thing that you're like, rah, and putting it into the page, putting it into art, putting it into clay. I think these are powerful ways to start to play with. Is it safe for me just to feel those things in the privacy of my own home? But then when we're ready to take it to relationships, I think what a lot of us start to find with our healthier folks, and that's also a new process of discernment, but um we start to trust a process that doesn't begin and end in our own mind, right? Of like, I'm angry, and now I need to talk myself out of it and tell myself it's time to get over it and tuck it away. It's like, I'm angry. Hey, I'm angry, and I don't feel good about this. And then maybe that person goes, wow, I had no idea. Let me give you this other context. And I go, oh, I didn't have that context. That's interesting. In other words, we start to learn what repair looks like, either through just honest dialogue around a thing, or maybe someone can genuinely apologize if they stepped on toes and they can actually repair. I think that's what most of us never had the experience with. We had
Mhm.
the experience with rupture and rupture and rupture and rupture, and I have to just hold it. And so we're really trying to avail ourselves for the first time of like rupture, because it's going to keep happening, right? There's no magical fairy tale ending with that either. Rupture, but repair,
Mhm.
rupture, repair, rupture, repair. And so we start practicing.
Yeah, I love that. Like that, what you said too about feeling the the loop of I'm angry, oh I'm mad, oh they should have said this, they should have known, and it's like
My
this very
God.
external
Yes,
process that's just a individual experience. Where
yes.
as we take it into the relational world and we allow the other person to, offer their context, and then we can experience repair. And it's like so scary to take that out of the individual experience and into the relational arena. But
And
Um,
I will say we might not experience repair, but that's still going to give us more choices than running that conversation through our head one more time. What I would say if I could, right? It's a sort of like, oh, and why I'm so mad. These loops that we can get in, even if we bring it to a relationship and they can't repair, they don't want to repair, they're like, whatever. Well, then we go, oh, that's not a safe person for me. I'm
mm,
going to stop leaning in as though it's going to be different any day now. I'm going to actually take this evidence in the moment. I'm receiving the feedback. We're still doing ourselves a favor because we're dealing in reality, right? So if we're coming out of this numb dissociative thing, it's sort of like, oh, I'm a real life person, so are you. And here's the real connective tissue in our relationship. And how do I actually feel about that? What do I want to do about that? So even when it's messy and hard, it's availing us of so much more agency, conscious choice. Like, what do I want to do now? And we don't have that without it.
mhm. Damn, that's so powerful that because I know so well that experience of being like, well, they da 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 da, and then like going to other people and being like, can I
Yes.
talk this through with you? And it's like
Yes.
everyone but the person that you're experiencing the conflict with.
It's
And,
such an important note that I tell people, if you don't know if you're a fawner, look to your gossip.
mhm.
Because we do need to expel that anger somehow, but are we only able to do it through this side door? And it doesn't ever really resolve it because they're just like, yeah, you're right. And then you go back to the loop or whatever. Um, and I'm not even mad about gossiping. It's sort of like, well, yeah, of course you're gossiping. Your body needs to get rid of that like toxic waste that's living in you. It's finding the only way that feels safe enough to do it. And like everything else, it's a yes and. Yes and. Wow, I've told this story to 15 people. I wonder if there's a way for me to handle it more directly. There's the
Mhm.
question, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that. Um, okay, so you mentioned when we were talking about anger, this idea of like kind of pushing the anger down and like not only do you get to be like super zen, I'm also better than everyone. So like sign me the F up for that. Um, so you've written about religious trauma, and I'm curious about how fawning gets baked into this sense of morality, whether it's the performing to be perceived as good, or if it's that disowning of our bad parts, like being angry and so on.
Well, I think even in a bigger picture beyond religion or spirituality, yeah, my first book was on spiritual bypass in 12-step recovery. And so I've always been interested in that idea that like, well, if I pray about it long enough, or if I meditate long enough, aren't I going to rise above all of the mess of this stuff? And I think a lot of people told me that the answer was yes. And so I was like, well, okay, then I'm going to do it harder and longer and do all the things. And then at the end of the day, I was like, oh my God, I'm still here. I'm still me. I'm still feeling these things. And yet these are offered as solutions. We are conditioned, I think, to fawn. We're conditioned in our religious communities. We're conditioned in our families. We're conditioned as women in particular. You know, you look at the definition of female, and there's a lot of synonyms there that sure do sound like fawning. It's like, oh, that's interesting, right? So it's not a gendered response, but I think in general, boys are conditioned towards a fight response. That's okay. Have a voice, you know, roughhousing, all of that. It's like allowed, and that's boys will be boys, and not so much for girls. It's sort of like put on a happy face and smile at the person who walked by you on the sidewalk, and oh, your dress is so pretty. It's like, okay, well, it makes sense, right? So it's not just that it's a threat response, a nervous system response. It's that we're getting it from every angle externally. Don't dress so sexy. Dress more sexy. Like be a team player, but have a voice. It's like it's so deeply confusing, all of these messages. And there's a double bind, in fact, in coming out of the fawn response. It's sort of like, okay, well, if I am not so pleasing, well, guess what? When you stop people pleasing, people will not be pleased. And now you have to like attend to that. But it's true in every scenario. You'll find that there's a double bind, which is also, I want to honor the truth of that. Um, Otherwise, we just keep shaming people like we've talked about, like, well, why wouldn't you just? It's like, well, because let me lay out all the consequences that my body is anticipating and that are in fact quite real. And we go, oh, okay, well, you make sense. And thank you, because I think that we do. And then we can go, okay, in safe ways and over time, can I look at some of these things like, well, if I just keep praying for the other person, that's gonna take my anger away. Or if I'm a good girl, that brings me connection, but is it the kind of connection I'm actually wanting to have? We get curious, I think. Curiosity is one of the biggest tools in my trauma tool belt. It's like, what if can we linger there a little bit longer and see what else we might notice?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a feeling, maybe it's a memory, maybe it's a sensation, but it's like, what else are we aware of when we kind of hang out in that like old idea that you have about what you're supposed to do? And there tends to be a lot of other wisdom there. And so we start listening. We start listening to ourselves, which is kind of the whole point. We stop solely orienting out there and we turn that gaze and we offer it back to ourselves with as much like compassion and empathy and patience as we've given out like candy to everybody else in our lives, right? It's sort of like, you get a pass and you get a pass. And oh, I have so much compassion for all of you, but it's gone missing for ourselves.
Yeah.
So just that curiosity of turning our gaze inward and going like, if I could feel however I felt about that and no one was going to be mad at me, how would I really feel? You know, maybe you even language it like that. Like you take the specificity of like the thing that's in your way. Well, I can't feel that way because it's not spiritual or it's not nice. Okay, well, what if that didn't matter? And you could bracket that out just for a moment and you
Mhm.
were allowed to feel anything no matter what. How do you feel about that?
That's reminding me a lot of somatic experiencing, especially in the work around anger. I've been in sessions before where they're like, okay, what do you want to do? Actually, I was working with one woman where I said, I want to push someone. I want
Yeah.
to push. And she goes, what do you want to push them into? And I said, a bush. And she goes, a bus. Great. And I was like, I didn't say bus, but I love how supportive you were about me wanting to push someone into a bus. And I feel like, especially in the context of like imagination and somatics, where we're not actually doing this thing in reality, but we're
Yes.
honoring, like, damn, like, I want to push this person into a bush. Like, what does that say about how I'm feeling towards them? Like, maybe I shouldn't go to their party tonight, or maybe, you know,
Yes.
it's interesting what you're saying. Like what I heard was stop exporting your wisdom and your the organic choice or boundaries or whatever how you want to exist in the world,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
instead kind of orienting in and being like, what is
Yes.
here?
That one pivot is everything.
And on that note, too, as we kind of come to a close, if someone listening realizes that they are a fawner and they've been actually, you said different verbiage. You said a fawning body.
Did I?
At one point, I think you said in a fawning body or something like that. I really liked that.
I'm certain I'm borrowing that idea from Dr. Resma Menakem, who wrote My Grandmother's Hands. He talks about racial trauma and he talks about the Black body and what it experiences in this country. And I love his body first language. So I'm sure that's why I did that. But it works. It works. Yeah, the fawning
Yeah,
body. Yeah.
I like it because it feels less like an identity and less like, oh, I am a fawner, and more like my body. I'm in a fawning body. Less
Mm.
element of shame. I just noticed when you said that
Oh,
for
great.
myself. So if someone realizes, okay, I'm in a fawning body and I've been in this fawning body for decades,
Yeah.
where do you recommend they start?
Oh my gosh. It makes me emotional just thinking about that moment. I want to say you've already started. That recognition is half of it. It's half of it. It's noticing this is the thing that's maybe had me what feels like in handcuffs for my whole life. It's why I've done things where I've maybe, blown past my own values even in order to just like make myself relationally safe over here. I mean, I go, oh my gosh, you notice yourself.
Mhm.
Don't run too fast past that mile marker. And um, and then bring that curiosity whenever possible into every day of your life and avail yourself of whatever tool your body wants you to get next, right? Because I'm not going to give you the roadmap here, right? I wish I could. There are lots of people in the mental health space who are like, here's the 15 things, go and do it. And I promise you freedom. And it's a wonderful sales pitch. I mean, at the end of the day, I feel like it's performing helpfulness more than actually being helpful. And so the wisdom is in you. That's what I say. The wisdom, the next step. Might it be people that have some answers and that are helpful along the way? Yes, very likely. But at the end of the day, can you take what they're offering and then bring it back into your fawning body and go, does that resonate?
Mm.
This is the step most of us miss. We go, oh, that's the thing I should do next. I'm supposed to take a walk for 40. I'm supposed to put my hand like this. I'm supposed to. And I go, well, if you want to try it, try it. But then notice how it feels for you. I mean, I see this with interventions in my practice all the time. There are certain things I do EMDR or IFS or somatic experiencing. There are people that like love one modality and another one, they're like, Ingrid, I hate this. And I go, thank you for telling me. Fantastic. We know this is not the thing for you. And so trust that. Trust that. And notice what you notice and trust that.
Mhm.
And see what you can do to honor it. It's like, it sounds so simple, but as you probably know, this is radical.
Mhm.
To make yourself the expert on your own life, to say, I'm not going to pay attention to this hierarchy to the extent that I have and go, oh my gosh, you mean I matter? What I feel and experience matters? Yes.
Mhm. What came up for me when you were describing that was you're familiar with Luis Mojica.
Oh, I love him.
I think I found you through him
Oh,
actually,
okay.
like, a long time ago, but, I've taken many of his, like, workshops and courses, and he'll teach, he all the stuff I mean, actually not all of it I love because that's exactly what I'm gonna talk about. Most of his stuff I love. He teaches this curriculum, and then he says, "Okay, let's pause here and notice if this is landing or not landing for you." And it just feels like this empowering moment of space where it's like there's this authority figure that's
Yeah.
telling me this is how things are, this is how this works, and then he goes, how's this landing for you?" And some people go, this doesn't land for me, and some people go, oh, this lands for me in this way, or and it feels so invitational and permissive, and it's like I feel like in those spaces for myself I've been able to be like, oh, thank you for giving me this 1 minute to be like, is this landing for me, am I hating this? Sometimes I'm like, I don't have capacity for this lesson today.
For all kinds of reasons, you might not be in alignment. And that's the whole point, is to just be in alignment with yourself.
Hmm.
Ugh.
So good.
Yeah, so good.
um and Yeah, I love that idea of just starting to orient back to self as the expert, which even as you said that, you're like, "You're your own expert." I was like, "No, I'm not." And
Yeah.
but
You.
yeah. Um, so coming to kind of the end of like, where can people find you? And also, can you talk a bit on this book that you have coming out? I'm
Oh,
so excited to read it. It's all about fawning and like what makes it different from any literature that's already out there on this topic.
yeah. Well, there ain't much, which is what makes it different, is that there isn't much on fawning. And you can find me, my website, ingridclayton.com, and then, all of the social media platforms. I think it's Ingrid at Ingrid Clayton PhD is my handle most places, but I'm on Substack and Instagram and Facebook, and join my newsletter so I can keep you up to date on all the fun things that are coming. The book's coming out in September. It is all about fawning, and I have 7 clients in my private practice that have gifted me with their entire fawning story. And it is so rich with, quite frankly, their insights and their lived experience. So that's really the bulk of it. So if I teach through my own story, they are now gifting me with the opportunity to teach through their story. And it leads to this really diverse set of experiences about what fawning looked like what's their origin story, why fawning, why was that the body's choice? What did it look like in their life before they even knew this thing had a name? And what has it been like to start to unfawn and unpack and sort of reclaim who they are in the world now? And I'm so excited about it. I feel like September can't come fast enough because I can't wait for people to read it and have more conversations. But you can pre-order it now wherever books are sold. So I hope people do. That really helps us authors.
Awesome. Any last thoughts before we hop off?
I don't think so. Thank you for such a vibrant conversation and for everything you do to further the conversation and help people come out of these chronic patterns.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me.